Hey, I'm back from Southern California and Project Lead, which was a week-long training sponsored by the National Breast Cancer Coalition. And I came back so much better informed about what a breast cancer advocate can be. It can be so many different things, of course. But my understanding now is that there's three types of advocacy in the breast cancer community at large, and many subtypes. But the three main types that I've learned about are patient advocacy, which is just more of a peer-to-peer kind of relationship and very social in nature, usually involves some sort of education or support. And then there's research advocacy, which is really very science-based and more for those who are interested in learning about science and perfecting the science. And mostly for people who are knowledgeable about science, both the science of breast cancer and the science of research. And then there's political advocacy or activism. And of course that has to do with lobbying for certain outcomes, mostly around funding and access to care. So the main type of advocacy that I learned about this year and this month in Southern California with Project Lead and the National Breast Cancer Coalition was research advocacy, the type that involves a lot of preparation and training. And this training was open to everyone, not just people who come from a science background or have a biology degree, which really helps if you want to do this kind of work, but it's not required. There is more and more of a push for researchers to include breast cancer patients in the processes of their research so that it could be more informed for the end result, the clinical perspective, not just the doctor's perspective in the doctor's office, but the patient's perspective in the doctor's office. And having those insights of a breast cancer patient can be really helpful for good outcomes for research. And so it's more and more encouraged for every grant that's funded for every researcher or research team to go out and get the grant. You have to also go out and find a breast cancer advocate or patient to help your research to become a little bit more real world, grassroots informed. And so Project Lead is out there, and there are other programs like the Komen Advocates in Science program that's trying to do this too. But Project Lead is kind of the gold standard for preparing advocates in the most rudimentary scientific ways for an intense week. And that's what I just went through myself. And what I learned was actually pretty disorienting, as you know, most people when they're immersing themselves in the world of research, you get a lot of kind of a wake-up call and a lot of disappointment, I would say, because you're learning that the research isn't as wonderful, the outcomes aren't as wonderful as maybe your doctor has presented them to you to be. So pretty much every modality that's involved in breast cancer is highly imperfect and sometimes even suspect. And that's been the truth all along the way, from the very early types of treatment to the kinds of treatment, chemo and radiation and tamoxifen and aromatase inhibitors. They're all not perfect for everyone. And all of them have, good outcomes, but not great outcomes. And so if you are informed in the breast cancer research world, you're realizing that there's a lot of room for growth. And so immersing yourself in the research for this intensive week has kind of a discouraging effect, I think, on most of us. You see how long and far we have to go. And you also see a little bit about how the standard of care concept really influences the lack of progress in science. Because in order to be ethical, you have to offer a patient the standard of care. And if you go too far from the standard of care, which is the commonly practiced modality of healing at the moment, even if that standard of care isn't terribly effective, which it's not in breast cancer, the most effective standard of care practice is surgery, but we almost always pair that with either chemo or radiation, so it's hard to separate the effectiveness of them individually, but we have seen that surgery is the most effective for sure. Anyway, it's hard to make progress when you are ethically held to keep all of your patients at the standard of care, and not kind of wander far from that. And so there's kind of an ethical dilemma inside research that doesn't allow us to make very much progress. And then there's this new kind of world of lifestyle medicine and functional medicine that enters the scene. And we didn't talk very much about that down at Project Lead, but being a nutritionist, of course, that's where I'm coming from. And lifestyle medicine is so hard to measure in scientific research terms because people don't always do the exact same things the way that they do when they're taking a drug. Now, people taking a drug also have lifestyle factors that influence their outcomes. So we're not measuring those, we're just measuring the drug in drug studies. But drug studies are much more easy to quantify and measure than lifestyle behaviors and the quantity of vegetables or fruit or berries or broccoli or any specific factor that you might be trying to measure in a lifestyle study. I came out of the LEAD training with a passion for this kind of research, even though it is really hard to do this kind of research. There are people trying to do it, and I'm excited to see and follow them and see what they do in the breast cancer world. So the things that I came away with, I guess, that I want to share today that are practical for you are that I just really hope that you will consider going to Project Lead if you're at all interested in scientific research around breast cancer and that kind of advocacy. I was intimidated, and I am among the more informed and educated around research. I took a course in research for my nutrition education and training, so I had a background in research already, and I was still intimidated. So I imagine people who aren't trained in the world of science or research are probably going to come in feeling pretty intimidated, and I just want to encourage you not to be too intimidated. There are people from every level of training and education or lack thereof at LEAD. And so I think you'll find yourself in good company if you have no background in science at all. But if you're passionate about breast cancer research and want to learn, that would be a great place to do it. But you also need to have some experience before they'll let you in, and some volunteer time, some volunteer hours racked up with some organizations that you're already working with. And so I wanted to give you some tips about what I would do now in hindsight, what organizations I would work with if I was interested in this kind of research advocacy and coming into it with no experience at all. And there's two organizations that I learned about down at LEAD this month, and I wanted to talk about them and how to get involved with them. One of them is called GRASP, and I have to read what that stands for because I can't remember it always. Guiding Researchers and Advocates to Scientific Partnerships is what that stands for, and it's a new organization. It's a really small, simple organization. They just have a few part-time employees, like a handful of part-time employees. And their mission is to get scientific researchers in breast cancer together with advocate patients, so patients that are wanting to become advocates, and build partnerships. So the way that they do that is at any breast cancer symposium, they're going to find the researchers that are interested in educating patients and partnering with them, and they will find a place for them to meet. And now they do it on Zoom as well, so you don't have to be at the conference or the symposium. And so if you sign up with GRASP on their website as an advocate, you will be matched with a researcher at some point. And you can get experience working with researchers and have opportunity to ask them questions about their research, and eventually maybe even partner with them on a research project, even prior to going to Project Lead. And that's how I would have done it if I had known about GRASP in the first place. I would have definitely dipped my toes in that world and gotten immersed in the world of research a little bit before going down to be trained. I thought that I needed to be trained first, and I was wrong about that because there were a lot of people who had already started doing advocacy that were not trained at LEAD and didn't know much about the science or biology of breast cancer. So I think it's important to spend maybe 6 months or a year, just dipping your toes in, meeting some researchers, and making sure that you're really interested in this work. And GRASP would be a really good way to do that. Their website is graspcancer.org. And once you sign up there, you'll have I think 5 areas that you can check on their long list of interest areas. So if you're HER2 negative or triple negative, or if you're African American and you're passionate about some of the aspects of a unique sector of breast cancer survivors or patients, you could check that on the list, and they'll send you those kind of research opportunities and researchers. The second organization is called the Light Foundation, and it was formed just last year at the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium. It's only been around for less than a year. It's a brand new organization, and it's still kind of working out its kinks. I believe it's based in California, but it's very online in its spirit. So it's on Instagram, and it has a website. LIGHT stands for Living Your Truth Empowered. So it's LYTE. And the website is LYT Empowered. So LYTEMPOWERED.org. lightempowered.org. And this is just one individual researcher who was doing some of the lifestyle types of research that I was talking about, having to do with exercise and nutrition, sleep, and stress. And she was really passionate about learning from breast cancer patients themselves. And she's been partnering with breast cancer patients heavily in the research projects that she's pursuing on behalf of breast cancer. And so it's just a really unique little niche. And I think if you're interested in some of these less easy to nail down studies that aren't terribly conclusive, or they're not given very much credence in the world of science, but they're very, very influential in the ways that we're taking baby steps toward learning about lifestyle factors, then this would be the organization to work with for sure. And I would encourage you to reach out to them, start following them on Instagram, and certainly attend the next breast cancer symposium in your area, whether it's San Antonio or a more detailed symposium. Like for me, I have a history of lobular cancer, so I'm going to attend or get the recordings of the Pittsburgh symposium next month that is held every year in Pittsburgh. I live very far from Pittsburgh, so I don't know how often I'll make it there in person, but if you can attend some of these symposiums, if there is one in your area that you're passionate about, then go there and meet some of these researchers in person if you can, and meet some of these organizations in person as well. Over here on the West Coast, we don't have as many opportunities to do that, so I'm going to do it online at San Antonio this year, and there still are some opportunities to interact on Zoom in these symposiums, even though it's a little more awkward to not be there in person. But that's another great way to dip your toes into the world of research advocacy. And I'll leave it at that for today, but I know there'll be lots of questions, and hopefully I'll have some follow-up videos on this topic based on your questions, if you can leave them in the comments below. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye-bye.